Welcome back to our channel. The purpose of this video lecture is purely academic, to examine a theoretical model within international political psychology, bureaucratic behavior, and military sociology. Specifically, this analysis investigates how targeted external shocks such as secondary sanctions, Magnitsky designations, and visa restrictions interact with internal elite dynamics in a hypothetical authoritarian-leaning regime. By deconstructing the psychological mechanisms of administrative sabotage, elite defections, and military detachment, this lecture seeks to provide scholars and students with a structured framework for understanding modern regime vulnerability in political psychology. If you find this institutional analysis insightful, please consider subscribing, sharing, and liking this video to support our ongoing educational series on global security and political psychology, academic analysis, elite behavior, and regime defection mechanisms. This lecture examines the collective psychological turbulence and regime defection mechanisms within executive administration and military structures under U.S. sanctions against a hypothetical, left-leaning autocratic leader. This analysis explores how targeted, surgical individual sanctions such as Magnitsky Act, designations and visa revocations coupled with macroeconomic countermeasures under provisions like Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act induce severe internal psychological shockwaves within an autocratizing state. It assesses how these dynamics accelerate regime collapse through the lenses of political psychology, bureaucratic behavior, and military sociology. The framework demonstrates how elite cohorts under coercive pressure recalibrate their rational choices, breaking away from the core regime structure. 1. External shocks and the dissolution of preference falsification. According to Timur Kuran's theory of preference falsification, actors under repressive regimes routinely conceal their private preferences while publicly broadcasting feigned loyalty to the ruler. Within this theoretical model, administrative functionaries privately recognize the irrationality of state policies, but publicly perform hyper-loyalty out of fear of state retribution. External sanctions act as a catalyst that forcibly shatters this facade through two distinct social, psychological dynamics. Activation of lifeboat ethics. When visa revocations and foreign asset freezes directly target regime enablers, the collective psychological orientation shifts abruptly from compliance to self-preservation. For the bureaucratic elite, the U.S. visa restriction signifies the structural destruction of their socio-economic capital-severing educational access for offspring, eliminating safe haven options, and causing exclusion from global financial networks. Recognizing that the state entity is sinking, elite actors adopt an aggressive lifeboat ethics, prioritizing individual survival over regime cohesion. Resolution of pluralistic ignorance and information cascades. Bureaucrats frequently operate under pluralistic ignorance, falsely assuming they are isolated in their private dissent. When punitive sanctions induce high-level resignations or quiet insubordination, an information cascade is triggered. The widespread signal that peers are preparing exit strategies instantly dissolves blind loyalty, substituting it with strategic hedging and mass defection. 2. Bureaucratic psychological turbulence and administrative sabotage. When economic crisis materializes under broad trade provisions, mid-level civil servants in economic, regulatory, and trade agencies experience acute cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance and rational choice dynamics. Bureaucrats face a profound conflict between their professional identity as custodians of national economic stability and their operational mandate to execute destabilizing executive decrees. The introduction of personal sanctions recalibrates their internal cost-benefit analysis under rational choice theory, where the internal cost of executive retaliation previously outweighed noncompliance. The external cost of personal, financial, and familial ruin caused by international sanctions now becomes the dominant risk factor. passive aggressiveness, and administrative sabotage. Rather than engaging in overt resistance, the Civil Service Corps employs nuanced institutional friction to undermine regime imperatives. Bureaucratic delay tactics, slow-walking directives, calling for punitive administrative actions, or regulatory crackdowns on private entities, are systematically stalled under the guise of procedural requirements or interagency reviews. Strategic leaks, internal documentation, revealing unlawful executive directives, is discreetly funneled to media outlets, opposition figures, or foreign diplomatic channels to secure post-regime legal immunity. 3. Psychological fractures within the military and the abandonment of regime defense. While civil administrations destabilize due to economic and procedural threats, military organizations experience psychological fracture, driven by perceived compromise of national defense and organizational identity. Erosion of military professionalism. In line with Samuel Huntington's model of objective civilian control, military units maintain state loyalty when their professional autonomy is respected. Executive overreach that politicizes military institutions, halts operational readiness training, or triggers the severance of critical signals. Intelligence SIGINT feeds from allied networks compromises this autonomy, generating collective resistance against executive leadership. Decoupling of constitutional loyalty from personal loyalty. Officers and flag ranks experience severe identity friction. Strong foreign warnings demonstrate that the current executive trajectory departs from established constitutional and alliance norms. The military apparatus, consequently, decouples its constitutional duty to protect the state from personal allegiance to the political leader. The military as a tacit veto player. In social military terms, armed forces in transitional environments rarely initiate direct coups. Instead, they act as silent veto players. When socioeconomic distress precipitates widespread civil unrest, and the regime orders military deployment against domestic populations, military leadership predictably refuses enforcement, leaving the leadership in a power vacuum. 4. Collapse of judicial police apparatus and strategic vacuum. The detachment of judicial and police structures marks the final operational phase of authoritarian breakdown. Reversal of the bandwagon effect. Judicial figures and senior law enforcement officers face a sudden reversal when foreign state departments explicitly designate coercive actors for sanctions. Realizing they are positioned to become post-crisis scapegoats, these officials cease pursuing politically motivated cases and instead initiate covert inquiries into inner-circle corruption. Paralysis of the coercive apparatus. As theorized by Guillermo O'Donnell and Philippe Schmitter, authoritarian frameworks collapse when their coercive apparatus suffers systemic paralysis. When enforcement officers engage in passive non-compliance, executive orders fail to translate into administrative action, creating an absolute vacuum of authority. Structural regime failure. In conclusion, an authoritarian-leaning executives' persistence in anti-market policies, when confronted with targeted external pressures, leads directly to the complete internal erosion of elite cohesion. Faced with surgical personal liability, the bureaucracy engages in administrative sabotage. The military command withdraws its protective umbrella to act as a silent bystander, while judicial and law enforcement assets suspend coercive operations. Out of self-preservation, groupthink disintegrates into individual exit strategies, leaving the executive isolated in an echo chamber of sycophants and leading to total structural regime failure. Closing remarks and ancient Eastern philosophical critique. Thank you for watching this lecture. To conclude our theoretical exploration, we reflect upon the perennial nature of statecraft through the lens of ancient Eastern wisdom. The political terminal state analyzed today, where a ruler becomes isolated by hubris and abandoned by the state apparatus, was warned against millennia ago in classical philosophy. As stated in the Zhunzi, within the chapter Wang Zhi, 君者周也，庶人者谁也. 水则乃舟，水则覆舟. The ruler is the boat. The people are the water. The water can sustain the boat, but the water can also overturn the boat. Furthermore, the Mencius reminds us of the institutional reality regarding the loss of legitimacy in Li Lo Shan.
劫本之失天下也，失其民也，失其民者，失其心也。
Ji and Zhou lost the realm because they lost the people. Losing the people means losing their hearts. When a regime relies solely on coercive intimidation and ideological insulation, it mistakes short-term compliance for genuine governance. As classical thought demonstrates, an authority that isolates itself from reality and mismanages state security inevitably dissolves the trust of its elites and citizens alike, ultimately collapsing under the weight of its own internal contradictions. If you appreciated this analytical, deep dive into political psychology and international relations, please like, subscribe, and share this content. We look forward to your thoughts in the comments below.